Okay, hi everybody. Welcome back again. Sorry for the little confusion in the last tapes I sent out, last videos I sent out. I guess some of you were having problems uploading it or accessing it, and someone said it was all blocked. The videos are blocked in your email, so I'm uploading everything to YouTube. Send you guys the links in your email. All right. So this is where this will be on as well. So modern era. This is the this was the topic of our second quarter of this year. It's 7/50/1914. The major concepts going on in this video are industrialization, imperialism, nationalism, and global migration. You all have a pretty good handle on a few of these things, but I want to um, clarify all these concepts and give you the kind of the big important details of these concepts. There's a lot to this. This is the era where there's more concepts than any other. So I'm going to try to keep it to the most essential stuff today. All right. So I'm going to start with industrialization, and I'm going to toggle back and forth between this map and this slide for industrialization, so you can kind of have a picture of where everything is happening as it's happening. All right. I think geography is important, so I want you to have a good picture of it. So here's industrialization. So first of all, industrialization has to do with the production of goods. Um, Industrialization changes because you go from the cottage industry and the putting out system, which is where skilled craftsmen do all their work by hand. The process is very slow, but it's kind of leisurely. They work in their own homes or workshops. They have no real oversight. There's no one like supervising them. But that changes with the development of the factory system, which involves the mechanization of labor. There's machines and assembly lines and all kinds of new technology, but the factory system is where goods start being produced with industrialization. And that leads to a whole host of things. Um, so where does industrialization begin? Well, remember, a variety of factors lead to the rise of industrialization, including, or excuse me, in England. All right, remember that's where it begins. So we have the first industrial revolution here in England. So this little tiny country over here, this is where industrialization really begins in 1750. So why does it begin there? Well, because of the geographical kind of natural resource layout, you have coal and iron resources in abundance here in England. A lot of coal, a lot of iron, and the coal and iron is located near the high population areas. So it's set up for urbanization as well. So where all the people are is where they can start a factory. So that just those are two things that make it pretty easy. There's also an abundance of rivers and canals and trade routes. England also has an advantage in that it has a lot of colonies, so there's a lot of there's places to get natural resources from to fuel the factory system. So that's why it really starts in England, is those major factors. One other thing I didn't say, and I forgot to say, is that there is a very supportive government in England. Remember, in the last era, we talked about the scientific revolution and the Protestant Reformation. Those are very secular, not completely secular, but those movements move toward a secular society. So governments are more open-minded, or the English government is at least more open-minded towards technology, towards progress and innovation. And so it's open to this possibility, and it's supportive of industrialization and factory systems. Okay, so there are a number of just examples of um, kind of machines in the first industrial revolution you should know about, and mostly is like steam power. That's what the first industrial revolution kind of or that's kind of the outcome of the first industrial revolution in terms of the type of goods that are made, or the products that are now made in the factory system. Is that there's goods like the steam engine, for example, that run on coal, but the engine produces steam, and that makes a ship or a a train or whatever start moving. Um, the internal combustion engine is also another major innovation. along with the Bessemer processor. There's also the screw propeller, and throughout the second industrial revolution even, you see steel-hulled ships. All those things make transportation and trade much easier and faster, giving England and any other country that industrializes a great advantage. In the second industrial revolution, you'll note here that there's more of a reliance on like fossil fuels, different fossil fuels, not so much coal and iron, but oil. Oil has become a major necessity for factories in the second industrial revolution. And the second industrial revolution, which is here in 1850, that's when you see a reliance, more focus on steel products and chemicals and electricity, things like the telegraph, in the railroads, and even early cars. So all those things require oil and gas to run. So you see a reliance on natural resources, but particularly fossil fuels. Okay. One thing this does is that one thing also, kind of going back to the factory system, is that it concentrates labor in a single place, meaning like everyone's working in a factory. There's a bunch of workers in one place, and there's a high degree of specialized labor. Like everyone in the factory system, all the workers, remember, are very unskilled. All they have to do is do one tiny job. So, for example, if they're making a chair, just for example, you'd have someone who's responsible for creating the legs of the chair, someone who's responsible for putting in the seat of the chair, and then you have another person who just has to attach the back of the chair, right? So there's very specialized tasks, and it requires very little skill. And so those people can get paid very little as a result. And what happens to the skilled craftsmen and artisans is that their jobs become obsolete, and they're kind of pushed out of their craft is no longer needed. When the second industrial revolution hits in the 1850s, that is when you see the idea of the factory system spread throughout Western Europe, to places like France, in Germany, in Belgium, and also goes to the United States. It also spreads to Japan later, and then later in Russia. The second industrial revolution, like I said before, also leads to more of a focus on chemicals, steels, electricity, oil. That's kind of what it relies on. As a result, also, you have new patterns of global trade and production. Industrial countries go after raw materials in new markets. So, as you know, raw materials are needed for factories, and with industrialization comes urbanization, which means there's more people in one area. So there's a higher need, there's a higher population density, and so there's more food supplies needed. And so this leads to the growth of export economies around the world. So there are raw materials that are great for export that industrialized countries, they use their colonies to export for money in return and for manufactured goods. So we're talking things like cotton and rubber and sugar, for example, are highly desired raw materials in the early part of the 1800s. Later, industrialized nations go to Africa, as you'll know, and they go to Asia to look for things like copper, oil, tin, other kinds of metals that are important for factory system as well, and rubber as well. Okay. The big dichotomy here between there's a big dichotomy between countries that decide to industrialize and countries that don't. So places in the Middle East, like the Ottoman Empire, China, they don't industrialize, they resist this trend. And this is kind of their demise, at least their downfall. Now they have certain kinds of manufacturing. There's iron working in India. You guys already know there's cotton production in India and also in Egypt. But these occupations are not as lucrative. So the failure to actually fully industrialize and just kind of stick to traditional manufacturing in a like really slow way, in a way without technology like they did in the Middle East and in China and even India, leads to the kind of the decline of those previously really powerful empires. Remember, before this time, before 1750, those are three places that kind of rule the world: India, China, and the Middle East. Their failure to industrialize really weakens them. Okay, global economy of the 19th century, and which is the 1800s, expands dramatically, right, from the previous period, due to a lot of trade of raw materials and finished goods. So these commodities give merchants and companies based in Europe and the US a real economic advantage. So one economic advantage is where you see opium. Remember the Opium Wars? Opium is produced in the Middle East and then sent into China by the British, right? Um, that is a way for the British to profit and prosper at unfortunately, the expense of people in Asia. Also remember that there's a new like political or new economic system that comes from industrialization. And is this really at the top right here is global capitalism. So global capitalism, right, is capitalism itself is the idea that, and it kind of comes from the Enlightenment, the idea that people can have the right to make as much money as they want. They can have as much property and they can live the life they kind of want for themselves. And so that applies to economics. And so in a capitalist system, remember, you have a free market, you have competition, businesses can regulate their own prices. There's laissez-faire economics, meaning no government intervention. Okay, and so that's what rises in the world, and there are varying responses to this. So to protect themselves, workers start to make unions, and they try to organize to get better conditions and higher pay, especially for the kind of the unskilled laborers in the factories. In China, for example, and the Ottoman Empire, the government obviously resists this factory system, the economic change, and they try to fall back on like traditional policies, um, which doesn't usually work. There are attempts at industrialization in China, such as the self-strengthening movement and the 100 Days reforms, but those ultimately fail as there's a lot of China again is starting to internally decay. But the 100 Days reforms and the self-strengthening movement in the Qing dynasty of China is an attempt to industrialize and modernize like Europeans, but China is not able to do that. And so governments are eventually willing to kind of work with the workers. They do give in a bit. They allow for they do make health reform laws and better I guess laws for working conditions and minimum wages and things like that. Those do get created. And lastly, what I would just want to say is that one thing you guys knew really well this quarter was like the new social impacts of industrialization. So a lot of new social classes happen, like captains of industry, those factory owners who become very, very wealthy. There's also a new middle class, and even the working and lower classes change a bit because they can afford more things. Because of the industrialization, common household items are much more affordable, and so people have more access to those, and that improves standard of living a lot pretty well. But there's still extreme poverty among the working class. Family dynamics change. Remember, families spend less time together. They work in separate factories. There's child labor. And again, rapid urbanization.